This podcast is brought to you by ShortsTV and is not affiliated with the Oscars or the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in any way.
Hello, and welcome to the ShortsTV podcast, our award season special as we journey on the road to the Oscars. I'm joined as ever by Rasha Goel. Hi, Rasha.
Hello, Carter. It is so great to be on the road with you. You know, this episode is a real treat for our listeners because this year, 2 shorts from the Middle East have been shortlisted for an Oscar in the live action category. White Eye from Israel and The Present from Palestinian director Farah Nabulsi, who we're speaking to today. But before we hear from Farah, we wanted to find out more about this creative wave that's coming from the Middle East. So we are extremely fortunate to catch up with acclaimed Palestinian director Hany Abu-Assad and his wife, producer-director Amira Diab. Now, one of his films that our audience may have seen is The Mountain Between Us, starring Kate Winslet and Idris Elba.
Yes, Rasha, that's 2-time Oscar-nominated Palestinian director Hany Abu-Assad and his wife Amira Diab, who herself is making her first short for Netflix. Kind of an exciting couple.
Well, thank you both for joining us from Amsterdam and taking the time out. I know that you're in the middle of post-production. So this year, 2 live-action short films from the Middle East were shortlisted. How meaningful is that to both of you, not only as creatives, but also as a community?
Representing a Palestinian story from my part of the world is great to have it in the shortlisted nomination for the Oscar. Because I think there are very interesting stories that need to be told and touch people's hearts. So I'm really happy about that.
For sure, any that comes from your area is a story that deserves to be seen. This gives a hope for a lot of young filmmakers from our region, gives them hope that their story will be heard. And this is, let's say, very hopeful, especially for young, upcoming filmmakers.
And Hany, how did you first get into film? Did you start making shorts?
I studied airplane engineering. By accident, I met a director and film director. His name is Rashid from Gaza. And I became his assistant. And then I decided to become a filmmaker myself, not just an assistant. Indeed, I did 2 shorts before I made my long feature film. Both they were just a kind of experimenting myself. Let's say this was in 92, which was still, let's say, cameras very rare. Like the digital, like later, 20 years later, or 10 years later, the digital cameras came and become very normal to have a camera, but in our time was very, even video camera was very rare. So I learned very much during these 2 shorts. I learned what is the technique of filmmaking, but also what is my role in it as a director.
I studied astronautical engineering, so there is hope for engineers.
Can you both tell us a little bit more about the film industry in Palestine? I mean, there may be some people that are not really familiar with the industry, and given your experience and background.
The industry is in Palestine is not that filmmaking is not that big. I think who started it was Rashid Mashharawi, Elise Liman, Michelle Khalifi, and then came Hany Abu-Assad, and then I think he's the one who's now lifting up the whole industry and giving hope to young people to train themselves in what it means to make a movie and to tell a story rather than making a movie. And when we did our 2 features, we tried to use as much possible talent in the region. It's not easy. As Hany was mentioning, he learned how to make cinema through his shorts. It's not that they're real established industry like Hollywood or like Europe. There's a struggle a little bit with that, but I think the richness of the stories coming from there and living the conflict, the troubles. We don't have luxury life there. We both were born in Palestine. We didn't know what's luxury. We know what it means to be a resilient people. And I think that's why there is a lack of the industry, but there is plenty of place for good stories there. Though it's tension, there's a tension, conflict in Palestine, Israel, but it's really can create very, very, very interesting stories to tell the world.
Hany, you've had 2 Oscar nominations. So what kind of an impact do you think being on a shortlist or a nomination brings to a film?
It's a huge impact. The exposure you get from the press, from the audience, it's overwhelming. We don't have another way of as a young filmmaker to promote yourself than to be nominated for an Oscar. I mean, it's a huge.
It's amazing. One of the things that is interesting about shorts that seems to be happening, especially this year, many well-known movie stars have performed in shorts that are shortlisted this year. Tilda Swinton is in one, Oscar Isaac is in one, and in a film from Palestine is Saleh Bakri. Can you comment on this change, really, in the moving from features to now well-known actors and actresses starring in shorts?
Well, I believe this was always the case. I didn't know that it's a new phenomenon. A good, let's say, artist,
Okay.
Even if he become a big star, still when he get a good script, a meaningful script, he would participate. Why not? I mean, I feel like all the big stars should consider playing in a short movie if this short movie speaks to them and speak to their heart.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a very normal. I don't see any contradiction between making a feature film and a star and playing in a short movie.
I think that's totally right. But Amira, you're now making a new short. Is that right?
Yes, and in my lead actor is a very, very professional, great actor. His name is Amir Diab, and he's an amazing, amazing actor, and he's in my short, and he's playing a comedy role, and I love how the range that he can do, and it's amazing, to have him in the short, and it's very important. I agree with you and Hany. An artist should perform short, middle, or long movie, because if the story is good, then why not?
You guys are so passionate about what you do, and I can just feel that inspiration coming from you, especially when we look at the up-and-coming young filmmakers. So what advice would you have for up-and-coming filmmakers?
I always say the same. I mean, if you have a story to tell from inside and you really need to tell it, just do it despite the reaction of others. And second thing, I really always give the advice, before you start experiment, also you have to know the classical work and classical language of filmmaking. Because all the big artists in the world, from music side, painters, they could experiment and really well experiment after they know the technique of the classical painting or filmmaking or I truly believe that if you are a talent and you have something to say, yes, you have to follow that. But second, you have to understand the classical work of cinema.
What an interesting, talented couple. 2 people who've changed storytelling in the Middle East, and really they're paving the way for a whole new crop of storytellers.
That's so true, Carter. And one of those storytellers is our next guest, Farah Navosi, who is a British Palestinian director who swapped her high-flying career in finance for a chance to make it in the film industry. I love how she just took that risk. And she's now telling stories from the region. The Present is the 3rd short she has written, and it's her directorial debut and has been shortlisted in the live action short film category.
And what an interesting story it is. It tells the story of Yusuf, who's played by a very big, well-known actor from the Middle East named Saleh Bakri. And on his wedding anniversary, the character Yusuf and his young daughter set out in the West Bank to buy his wife a present. Between soldiers, segregated roads, and checkpoints, the simple task of shopping becomes a lot more difficult.
I need toilet paper, lemons. What we have here?
Security chief, move now! What do you want? Hey! We have a system here.
My house is just there.
Farah, thanks so much for joining us on the Shorts TV podcast. Farah, why don't you tell us maybe a little bit about your background? That must play into the storyline, and it'd be great to unpack that a little bit at the beginning and just get to know you.
I'm born and raised, educated in the UK, but my blood, my origin is Palestinian. And my background actually is in business, the corporate world, even my educational background. I basically went to Palestine for the first time a few years back. And long story short, I felt compelled to tell these sort of human stories and express myself creatively. I wrote and produced my first 3 short films, and this is, as you said, my directorial debut with The Present. And as a Palestinian, this speaks to my own identity in many ways. It's inspired by my own experience at checkpoints, witnessing other Palestinians at these Israeli checkpoints, and discussing with people.
So basically, you took a movie about a guy who wants to go shopping and turned it into a massive story and political statement. Is that right?
I think I took a very simple story that speaks volumes about an absurd and cruel reality that exists on the ground today. I don't think I'm making it's not so much to say a political statement. No, I'm making a film that I hope speaks to the humanity of an individual in terms of this story. But then on the bigger scale of things, when you zoom out, it actually reflects the macro of the humanity of an entire nation, really. So it's like Mama Africa said, if my truth then becomes political, there's nothing I can do about that.
Farah, in telling this truth, how did you get Saleh Bakri on board? I mean, he's an internationally recognized actor. Was he compelled by the storyline, or did you previously know him?
It's crazy. The world conspired. So I wrote the story, and then I co-wrote the script with Hind Shafani, who's also a Palestinian filmmaker. And she asked me at one point, she said, "Who do you picture as the character of Yusuf?" And I said to her, it's the actor Saleh Bakri. He just keeps coming into my mind. And I just think he has such intensity and dignity in all the roles he plays. And she said, "I know him." I was like, "Oh, okay." And so she introduced us by email, and then he read the script, and it resonated with him. He loved the simplicity of the story. He's Palestinian. I consider him one of the best Arab actors in independent cinema. He wanted to get on board. So really, the world conspired. I didn't have to audition anyone, and the person I literally pictured in this role is who we ended up with. It's wonderful.
That's incredible.
Farah, as you've worked with experienced talent, what do you think that brings to the film? And could you have done it with me, somebody without talent?
Farah, be careful how you answer.
No.
Carter, I'm casting you in my next film. Do you know what? You know what they say is that you could have a really good film, a really good story, but if the acting is not phenomenal, then you have half a film. And then on the other hand, you can have incredible acting and not such a great story or plot or whatever it is, and you've got half a film. But if you manage to marry the two, then you've got potentially an Oscar shortlister. I don't know.
Yeah,
so for me,
yeah.
I don't believe that the film would be half the film it is without, it just wouldn't be without Saleh Bakri. I mean, it's 24 minutes, the film, and he really just holds it the entire time. He's a phenomenal actor, in my opinion, brilliant. And so I was very blessed to have him.
Farah, how long did it take to film? How did that whole process work out?
Initially, it was supposed to be 5 days of actual shoot. I insisted on 6 days, actually, with my producer. I said to him, look, there are just so many unknowns, and it's really tough in the environment there. We just don't know. And I don't want to put this crazy unnecessary pressure on myself. It's hard enough, So it was 6 days of shooting. But do you know that scene 2 of the film, the scene where there's sort of hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians, that's an actual checkpoint. That's a real checkpoint. It's an infamous
Wow.
checkpoint in Bethlehem. It's called Checkpoint 300. And I felt really strongly about filming the actual checkpoint. I didn't have the budget I don't think we could have bought the authenticity if we tried to replicate it anyway.
Right.
So we actually shot that particular checkpoint guerrilla style. And that was done between 3 and 7 in the morning during one of our prep days.
Was there any, I want to jump in real quick and say, was there any fear though in filming at that time? Because, I mean, they could have kicked you out, right? There was no guarantee that you'd be able to get the scene. We just don't, it's unpredictable.
Yes, for that particular checkpoint, I was nervous the entire time, of course. We knew how far we could go before we kind of came into the line of vision of the military. We got bolder and bolder with our shots as the morning went on, if you like. And, we had a sort of, well, what if we are stopped? What's our story? And, sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith, and we weren't stopped, and it was as smooth as it could have gone. And I'm just grateful. I'm grateful that it worked out the way it did.
I understand you were at some actual checkpoints, but then you also had to recreate that scenario. So if you could just walk us through that, or just share how you worked through that for this film.
Yes, so the main checkpoint that's in the film, this one, I remember even sketching it myself and then working with the production designer. And because there's over 100 checkpoints, 100 Israeli checkpoints in the West Bank, and another 100 or so flying checkpoints that can appear anytime, anywhere. And none of them really look alike. So I could create a checkpoint according to, what I needed for this film. And I based it on a particular checkpoint that's in Hebron, where the seed of inspiration for this film actually really came, where a young man lives on a road where there is a checkpoint about 80 meters from his house. So that's the one that I had in my mind when we constructed this one. I mean, this isn't funny because it's not, but it makes me laugh because when we built the checkpoint, actually, the surrounding Palestinians actually thought a real Israeli checkpoint had been constructed.
Uh-oh.
So, on the one hand, I was happy because it meant that we'd built such an authentic checkpoint. So I was happy that this, it was authentic. Like the people, the indigenous people thought it was a checkpoint. But of course, I ended up sending out runners and please tell them it's not real. Please tell them it's not real, because of course that's really upsetting for Palestinians in that particular area. They've got enough checkpoints to deal with, not one that's in their neighborhood now.
Right.
So the dynamics are bizarre, are frustrating, and on top of that, you've got to remember that these actors who acted the soldiers, they're dressed up. They've got these weapons, but this is real life for them. I mean, they go through these checkpoints in real life. So now you've asked them to act essentially as their oppressor. There's a cognitive dissonance in this. It was a bit bizarre, and this is their real life, and so having to act it, and yet it's their reality. It's a very somewhat sinister dynamic, actually.
Emotionally challenging, I would say, as well.
Yes, yeah.
Farah, can you tell us how you felt when you found out that The Present had been shortlisted for an Oscar? I mean, what a big moment.
Well, you want to hear the real story?
We want the real story, yes.
The real
The
story.
real story. The real story is, you're thinking to yourself, oh, I've qualified for the Oscars, and there's, I guess, 100, and at the time, I didn't know the number, but it turned out to be about 174 films. But I knew it was 150, 100 and something. So all this period, I just said, to even get shortlisted or, and eventually potentially nominated, you're looking at 10 films. My background is business. I was like, I did the numbers. The probability is not high, So I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So I actually made a decision that I was going to go to bed because, of course, in the UK, the timings, the time zones and all that. Anyway, I try to go to sleep. I finally fall asleep because, of course, I'm still very excited. But no, I'm going to wake up in the morning and find out because it's probably not going to happen. And I think it was nearly midnight, but my husband snored. Okay. So, and I was like, so he woke me up which I was really annoyed about because I'd finally fallen asleep. And I looked at my clock and it was a few minutes before judgment moment or whatever. So I thought, well, now I'm definitely not going to sleep. So I went and I took a look on Twitter, and already I'd received a message from a couple of people. That's how it happened. Of course, couldn't sleep for a good 3-4 hours after that. So
Wow, what a great piece of news to have woken up to.
Totally surreal. One of the things that I love about this category is that a first-time director, such as yourself, Farah, can go head-to-head with Pedro Almodovar, who is not exactly a first-time director.
it certainly isn't.
And that is a very, very heady prospect, but it's what makes this category so exciting.
Farah, looking ahead, I mean, you've talked to us about the journey and what it means and what you've gone through and just, being resourceful, putting this together. But if you were to get the nomination, what would that nomination mean to you, for you and for the film?
It would be insane. It would be wonderful. It would be a dream, I think, for every filmmaker in the world, really. I mean, anyone who says that it's not is not really being completely truthful with myself. Now, that doesn't mean like when you make a film, that's what you're setting out to do. I wasn't setting out to be nominated for an Oscar. I was setting out as a filmmaker to give audiences this emotional experience, and I want as many people to see my work, see my art, see this film, this story. I think it's one of those mediums of art that you really are making for an audience in many ways. It's not like you paint a painting and you can hang it on your wall or you can exhibit in a gallery. I don't think you make a film to just keep watching yourself alone in your home. You make a film to be seen by audiences. And for me, it was about getting really as many people to watch the film, like wanting, people to watch the film. Even being on the shortlist has meant that the film is getting even more exposure, that more people are going to watch it. And so obviously then being nominated, if it were to be nominated, means it's just even gone up another level of exposure and audience. And what that means for me is that I've given even more people this emotional journey and raised in many ways the global social conscience, because it is a fiction film, but it is based on an absurd reality on the ground.
And you told the story so beautifully. As Carter said, this category is so exciting because you get such a mix of storytellers from different backgrounds and ranges of experience. One of the most interesting things about this category is that it's so diverse and often has many more women directors than the best film category or the best director category. So as a female director in the Palestinian film industry, what has your experience been to get to where you are today?
I haven't been in the industry in that sense long enough, or a director long enough, to say to you, oh, I have faced, certain issues, or this has been a real struggle. And in that sense, I'm in some ways at the edge of my understanding of it in terms of my own personal experience. That said, let's say looking in and at the industry of the past decades and so forth, we're definitely moving in the right direction. It's interesting because most people think in the Arab world, where, let's say women are considered, let's say, more oppressed, there's actually more female directors. And in fact, the other Arab shortlisted film, which is international features, The Man Who Sold His Skin, is by a Tunisian female film director as well. And then, looking at the West, actually, it's where female directors seem to be in some ways more sidelined. It's just the dynamic is quite interesting.
Farah, what advice would you have for your fellow filmmakers at this point?
I would just say, at the end of the day, tenacity. You've just got to keep pushing. And I always say, and I live by this, it's the title of a book, but it's feel the fear and do it anyway. And that's how I move forward with everything. Every time I feel the fear, that's okay, but do it anyway. Keep going, So
that's some great advice. But you are fearless. I mean, you were at the checkpoint with no fear of making this film happen.
There was fear.
Exactly.
There was fear, but it's just you. Fear is my friend, not my enemy, if you like, And they always say that everything anyone ever wants is on the other side of fear, and it's true. So just use it actually to kind of somehow keep you moving and not paralyze you.
Love that.
That is
Absolutely
great.
love
I have to say, I think that is a really great piece of advice. You kind of have to take it right up to where you are. There is fear, or it's not worth doing almost.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's great. We certainly hope your film will be part of the Oscar-nominated short films release that's going into theaters on the 2nd of April. We would love to have you be there.
Thank you for being with us, Farah. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and hearing your story and just celebrate with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Really.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks
very
for having
much.
me. I've really enjoyed this.
Well, Rasha, those were 3 great guests, every one of them with interesting insights. But how lucky were we to get to speak with Hany Abu-Assad, one of the leading directors in the Middle East, 2-time Oscar nominee. Just amazing that he popped out from his post-production and talked to us. That was kind of amazing.
Such a treat, Carter.
It
Such
was
a treat.
such a treat. And you know, both Hany and Farah said something that I thought was really important, and they restated a truth, really, that Linda Olszewski back in episode 2 told us, and that is that you've got to tell your story from the heart, from your own personal experience to make an impact. And they both said the same thing, and I think when you see the present, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, and another thing that stood out to me too, Carter, was the point of overcoming your fear. You know, Farah talks about how she was filming at a checkpoint on the West Bank, which I can imagine is not the easiest thing to do and could be a huge challenge when your life is also at risk. So, you know, for anyone who's worried about the logistics of making your own film, it's really about overcoming fear and just having that courage.
Well, I'm going to do the same thing, overcome my fear, and say that that's it for this episode. You got to join us next week when we'll be 1 week further down the road and 1 week away from the nominations.
Countdown begins. I can't wait for this, Carter. All right, guys. Well, that's it for us. Don't forget to subscribe to the award season podcast from ShortsTV, and feel free to leave us a comment.